Hi everyone, thanks for being here to learn about the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashana, and in the spirit of hospitality and welcoming, I want to call out Candy, who's new with us. Happy to have you here and thank you for being part of this learning hour. Thank you. So Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, with schools starting and people coming back from vacations and so on, that there is a sense built into the calendar and into our mindset that this is a time to get serious. And the high holy days, which is this period, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, are not supposed to be sad or depressing and certainly not guilt-ridden, but I would say serious and reflective and introspective is what describes them, but also celebratory and a time of beauty, hopefully of spiritual beauty, but also of physical beauty. Judaism understands that our bodies are and our senses are vehicles of experiencing holiness. So there's not this separation between, spirit is everything up there and everything down here is secular or is material in the negative sense. The Jewish idea is that you use your body and senses to enhance what's holy, beautiful, and spiritual. So I brought some things from my home to give you a taste of how we add beauty, and the Hebrew term for that is hidur mitzvah, which is one of the pillars of the JCC's new mission statement. Hidur mitzvah, making mitzvot, points of spiritual connection, beautiful. So these candlesticks are actually from 3 generations beyond me. They're from 1850. Wow. And I know they look very heavy, but I invite you to come pick them up. They're hammered so finely that they're extremely light. And they were made in Romania. And all Jewish holidays start in the evening, because in the creation story it says, and there was evening and there was morning a first day, evening and morning a second day. So we start in the evening. So the holiday begins by lighting the candles, and people are usually quiet for that. And there is something very primal about fire, how it brings people together, just like a campfire makes people thoughtful. And if you think about your children or grandchildren, or what one day might be your children or grandchildren, and what would get their attention, something like candles being lit at the table would. And I want to draw a distinction here between candles as in for a romantic evening, and this kind of candle, which is at a family gathering. That distinction also goes for how we celebrate the Jewish New Year versus the secular New Year. The Jewish New Year is all about remembering, and the secular New Year is really about forgetting. Because the purpose of the secular New Year for many, many people is to drink too much, and the result of that is you forget. And maybe you even make some ill-informed choices.
For fun.
But the Jewish New Year is about making more informed choices and bringing a sense of sanctity and holiness. And the secular New Year, also people dress up a lot, and maybe they're particularly colorful. And the color of the Jewish New Year is white. So I have a lot of white shirts in my wardrobe. Just like for Shabbat, because white represents a kind of a holiness and purity. So we light the candles, and then we say Kiddush over wine or grape juice. And I'll just say the short blessing now, it's just so that you hear some Hebrew and you're welcome to drink. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. We acknowledge you, God, sovereign of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. We say l'chaim, to life. May it be a year of life and growth for all of us.
Yes.
Great juice.
Larry is on the way out.
And then a lot of you know that every Friday night we have a challah, which is a really delicious bread. But for this holiday, we have a round challah. There's a lot about roundness at this holiday, this the circle of life and the roundness of the new year. So this is a really nice challah cover that I got in Jerusalem on one of my trips, just so you see it. And again, the idea of Hidur mitzvah, making a mitzvah beautiful. There's absolutely nothing wrong with using a plain white napkin to cover your challah. There is nothing wrong with it. But if you're looking for opportunities to just create a special atmosphere around mitzvot, then you use an opportunity like covering the challah to get something that's beautiful. Okay, so here's a beautiful round challah. Yes.
Could you explain about why you cover the challah to begin with?
Yes. It probably began to keep flies away. It probably began as a custom that had a very practical orientation. But what people say about it is that since it's the last of the blessings, it's after the candles and after the wine, we don't want to embarrass the challah. And so we pretend that the challah doesn't see what's going on until we get to bless it, and then we can take its cover off and then say, oh look, we're paying all eyes on you.
Everyone likes you best anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so the way we generally do a challah blessing in camp and kind of light-hearted situations is we have someone touching the challah and then everyone else touching someone who's touching someone who's touching the challah. So we're going to do that right now. So I'm going to touch the challah. So someone's going to have to. Very good. So now we're all part of
We have the
this.
human chain.
Yes. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Okay. And is this from Ricky?
It is.
It
It
is.
may not be inspired, I find it's very nice.
Okay. So tear off a piece and pass it around.
Oh, one piece? You want to go one way to take something?
And not everyone does this, but we do this. We always put a tzedakah box on our holiday or Shabbat table, just as a reminder that we have a responsibility to improve the world. And when our kids were little, they always put coins in a tzedakah box, and it's a very nice habit to get kids used to. And by the way, it makes a wonderful bar, bat mitzvah, or wedding gift, because they're very, very beautiful tzedakah boxes out there, and it's a way of saying to people, I hope that in your life you honor this Jewish value.
What does tzedakah do? It's delicious.
Tzedakah actually means justice making the world a more just place. Many people say charity. It's not exactly charity. Charity comes from the word caritas. Cara means heart. And the idea of charity is that when your heart moves you, you give, which is a very beautiful notion. But the Jewish notion of tzedakah is it's not just when your heart moves you. It's your responsibility. Justice shall you pursue. In the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, it says the word justice twice. That's how important it is. So tzedakah is an obligation. It's not, I feel like it today. It's I have to do something related to tzedakah every week. So those are some of the things that happen at the family table. And then some people choose to go to synagogue to services. The rabbis and cantors, the people who lead the services, are dressed in white. There's usually extra special music. The prayers are richer and deeper. You're not supposed to look at what other people wear, but you do. And you especially do if you're on the East Coast and maybe in the South. Here it's a little looser. But as some of you know, for the last several years I've gone to Alaska to be with a congregation in Fairbanks for the holidays. And they are the most fashion unfriendly group of Jews I have ever seen.
Sandal and boots, right?
There are a lot of boots, a lot of jeans, dockers,
White flannel?
Laura's been in the last. I like
flannel, yeah. Yeah. So the first year I actually brought heels, and then they were laughing at me like, "What do you call those?" So now it's just very, very comfortable things. So I want to read a couple things related to, again, the meaning and the message of the holiday. So this is my wish, this is my prayer for people who participate in the holiday. May this season call you by name, stir, and inspire you. May the season call you by name. May you find yourself recognized in the possibility. May you feel that you belong. May you feel that a loving presence is watching you and wanting you to participate. So now I'll share with you a little bit of a High Holy Day, for lack of a better term, exercise, but it's not physical. In the early chapters of Genesis, God asks Adam, "Where are you?" And it's not asking for a physical location because, first of all, God knows where people are, and secondly, Adam was the only person around, so God really knew because, that was it. There was only one person to see. It wasn't like in the middle of Beijing or something. During the month of Elul, which we're just coming to the end of, and throughout the High Holy Day period, we ask the same question of ourselves: where are you? So I'm going to invite you now, you can keep eating if you don't worry about messing yourself, to close your eyes, and I'm going to say pairs of words, and I'm going to ask you to consider, this is just for yourself in your own mind, where you are on this spectrum. So this is no judgment, this is just, where do you find yourself in terms of this expanse? Where are you between alienated and connected? Between distant and present? Between broken and whole? Between wanting and satisfied? Between indifferent and engaged? Between rigid and resilient? Between closed and open? And here are some other questions to consider. If you prefer to open your eyes now, you can. That we consider at this time of year, not how religious am I? That's not what this is about at all. Not how much do I pray? How strong is my faith? It's none of that. These are the questions. What deserves my love and attention? What goals should I pursue? What is ultimately valuable and how do I seek it? What is ultimately devoid of value and toxic, and how can I avoid it? So it's really wonderful to be part of a tradition that takes issues like that seriously. And for some people, a synagogue service accomplishes a consideration of these questions and ideas, and for some people, a walk in nature or listening to a symphony or snuggling up with a friend or a pet or a spouse will accomplish it. But these are the days that are, if you will, assigned to us to make this happen. So I'm going to next talk about Yom Kippur, but if anyone has anything they'd like to add to this, I'd be welcome, and we'd all appreciate hearing it. Anything you'd like to add? Okay. So there is time, there is 10 days between Rosh Hashana and Yom Kippur, and those are days where people who take this season seriously will tend not to be involved in entertainment or more frivolous things, you know, maybe not go shopping or get a makeover, things like that. It's more a time to think about forgiveness, asking for forgiveness and granting forgiveness. And there's a wonderful idea in Judaism that if you ask someone for forgiveness 3 times and they don't grant it, you should still consider yourself forgiven. So the idea is that you don't carry around this burden endlessly. You have to mean it when you ask for it. You have to be sincere about it, but that there is a limitation. And the idea is that we can't ask God for forgiveness until we've asked people for forgiveness. So lest someone think, you know, well, I don't have to say I'm sorry to him or her because I know God has forgiven me. Not good enough. You know, you have to do the hard work. It's really much harder to ask a person of forgiveness than to ask God for forgiveness. And in recent years, you know, after many years of discussions with people about this holiday, I see that more than anything, most of us need to forgive ourselves for poor choices we've made in the past and ways we've let ourselves down. And if you're a person who is bearing that burden in your own life, that there's something that you have a hard time releasing yourself from responsibility of, maybe this will be your year. And you can find a way to forgive yourself by doing an act of atonement. And in Judaism, atonement involves acknowledging what you did that was wrong. If it involves another person, asking them for forgiveness, doing some kind of act of tzedakah, some kind of helpful act in the world, some kind of constructive act in the world, and dedicating it to the person or to the situation in which you felt like you acted in a way that fell short of what you'd like to be. And then, if you would like, on Rosh Hashanah afternoon, actually, there's a custom of going to a body of water and taking breadcrumbs and releasing them in the water, fish will eat them up and, you know, be free. Be free. The Jewish God is very much a God of freedom. The most significant thing we say about the Jewish God is that God wanted us to be free from slavery, and contrary to what many people stereotype Judaism as, is a religion of great guilt. That's a notion that came out of somewhere, and probably not the Sephardic cultures, probably the Ashkenazi cultures. And Judaism and I think all religions, you know, want us to be, as Betsy says, the best possible version of ourselves, which we can only be if we have a sense of freedom and entitlement in the best sense of the word. You know, there's a Jewish notion that every person should carry 2 pieces of paper in their pockets. One is, I am nothing but ashes and dust, and the other is, the world was made for me. And that we live between those 2 notions. So when I say entitlement in the best sense of the word, that's what I mean. Not you know, I deserve everything, but, you know, I deserve what I deserve, and everyone deserves what he or she deserves too. So Yom Kippur, which means a Day of Atonement, is a 24-hour period in which many Jewish people fast from solid and liquid food, and they moan and groan about it a lot. And they stuff themselves so much at the end that this notion of, oh, Yom Kippur, I'll lose a pound, is really not relevant for most people. Yom Kippur, so this is with the serious side, but it's not morbid. It's truly not morbid. Yom Kippur is supposed to mimic our deaths. Yom Kippur is supposed to remind us we're not going to live forever, and so what are we going to do with the life that we have? So all the traditions for Yom Kippur are supposed to hint to us that one day we won't be here. So when you're dead, you don't eat and drink. Jewish people, when they die, if they follow traditional laws, they are wrapped in white shrouds. And so on Yom Kippur, many people wear white to mimic the shrouds. Jewish people who follow Jewish law are buried without shoes, without wearing shoes. And so on Yom Kippur, people do wear shoes, but they don't wear leather shoes. Now, it's sort of ironic because these days the most comfortable shoes are not leather shoes. They're Nikes or something. And you can wear Nikes because they're not leather. You can wear canvas or sandals or whatever isn't leather. But for many, many centuries, the only comfortable shoes were leather shoes, and you wouldn't wear leather shoes on Yom Kippur. And you don't adorn the body. Many people don't bathe. Maybe they brush their teeth, spit out the water, but they don't do any full bathing. They don't put on makeup. They don't bedeck themselves in jewelry. Again, if you're part of many communities, you do just the opposite. You try to make yourself as attractive as possible. But really, the idea is that you become as plain and basic as possible on this day, so that you're saying to yourself, this is what it'll all come to. There's some very, very beautiful music for Yom Kippur. Many people tend to stay in the synagogue the whole day simply because if you go home, what are you going to think about? Food. So that's why they tend to stay there. And it's a very, very lovely notion that the first thing you're supposed to do at the end of Yom Kippur, after you have a little bite of challah or something to drink, is immediately put the first nail hammer into the sukkah, which is the outdoor booth that we make for the holiday of Sukkot. Because that's such an affirming thing to do. You're building something and you're doing it outside. So that's a lovely notion. And also because it's a mitzvah to build a sukkah, and the idea is that we feel confident at the end of Yom Kippur. We've done our inner work, we've done our work with our family and friends. We're going to be here for another year, so let's immediately start planning for the next holiday. So that's the idea of that. Anything you'd like to add or ask, Kyle?
I had a question for not wearing leather shoes. Obviously, most people had leather shoes for a long time. So was the idea to be barefoot at?
Well, that's a good question. You know, maybe it did start out to be barefoot, but I think, you know, maybe there, I didn't know enough about the history of shoes. To know what people did or didn't do, but the idea was that you not be too comfortable.
Nor. When people, in the last few years, I've been caught off guard by a couple generic apologies.
Yeah.
And I never know how to respond. Well, mostly because a couple of them happened over text, and that felt very strange. But I also just don't know, is there when it's kind of just a generic as somebody saying it to, is there a way to respond that's appropriate? Or?
I personally feel like that misses the entire point of it. I don't understand it, and, you know, I'm not sure what those people are thinking. So I wouldn't necessarily respond.
Got it. I'm just curious.
Do you mean,
It's like
did they send it specifically to you though?
Or it's a mass
Do they
thing.
send it
Or
or
was it a mass email to a whole bunch of people?
to me?
Okay, so I feel like that might be a little bit different. I think, at least from my perspective, and I do agree with Lenore when somebody does that, you know, it sort of misses the point, but I think they said it specifically to you, that for a lot of people acknowledging that they were wrong, or if they, part of the forgiveness piece is things that you've done knowingly and things you've done unknowingly that you're supposed to be asking forgiveness for. Because I guarantee to every single person in this room, I probably have done something unknowingly that hurt your feelings, and I don't even know that I didn't. I don't even know. So, if they specifically sent it to you and it wasn't like to a large group of people, it's hard for people sometimes to be able to have a face-to-face conversation with you and or call you and say it. So this might be their best attempt. There seems like a lack of human connection, which is really what the goal of the forgiveness is about. But if it's an opening for them, and you can say, I forgive you.
And that's what I'm like. What do you? I don't even. Do you say that? I mean, because
If you do,
Yeah.
you should say it. If you don't really feel that way, then you shouldn't say something that you don't really mean. But like if they've done nothing wrong,
right.
then you can say, I appreciate the sentiment. You've done nothing wrong. Thank you for thinking that you might have. You know, I don't know. I think saying I'm sorry or really apologizing, which is much more than I'm sorry, it's actually saying I'm wrong and I'm asking you to forgive me. Thank you, Kelly Corrigan. Is a hard thing for a lot of people to do. So no matter how people begin that, and it could be an opening to a conversation based on your response too. So.
Diane, is your kugel there now? Okay, so we're gonna take a kugel break.
Yes.
Diane's kugel and Jody brought some extra food there, and then we'll come back and do a little more talking, okay? Friends, this sheet that I passed around is also a kind of a worksheet for the holidays, and when I teach classes on this, and I give this out to people, I say, look, if you're going to services and you're going to get bored by the prayer book, spend time on this. You know, use the language that works for you. So you see, it's kind of a self-assessment. A self-assessment that has spiritual and psychological and emotional components to it. And again, just to make a differentiation between the secular New Year and the High Holy Days, I'm sure there are people who with the secular New Year say, I'm gonna, be a better person and be more charitable and not yell at my kids and not hassle my spouse. But generally the secular New Year is, I'm going to go to the gym more and lose 5 or 15 pounds. And I know that there are people who at the Jewish New Year decide they're going to go to the gym more, they're going to lose some weight. But it really is supposed to be about our behavior and attitudes. So if this is useful to you, please use it. And if you turn the page over, I thought we could conclude, I'll see if there are any other questions, but if not, we'll conclude by reading this. And in the middle there, where there are a few words in italics to the right, it's a beautiful song, which I'll sing, and hopefully some of you will join with me, just to make it bearable. But before we conclude with this, are there any questions or anything anyone would like to add from your own experience?
I have a question. For the tzedakah box, does it always has to be money, or do you also do tzedakahs in action?
That's a great question. There's a different word for it. Tzedakah is always with money, but we have something called gemilut chasadim, which are actions that we use our person for. So cooking a meal for someone, calling them on the phone, writing them a card, and anything that involves helping people. Babysitting for a friend, that is also highly valued, but it has a different name.
Thank you.
Laura?
Are there times in the Jewish calendar where you check back in on how you're doing with this, or or just some of the stuff that you set for yourself for the year?
Well, that's a great idea, and it's not exactly built into the calendar. However, I feel like the High Holy Days and Pesach kind of balance each other out. They come about 6 months apart. Rosh Hashana, we do more of an internal soul cleansing, and what supports it is to do physical cleansing. And Pesach is more physical cleansing, but if you do a soul cleansing, it supports it. So I feel like those are times when you can check in.
I also think, Laura, people use Shabbat for that purpose a little bit too, if they're using that time of separation of the space for reflection in that way. Right.
And sometimes I know people, like we would do these things at temple, like with family services, and they would collect them and they would mail them to you the next year to open them to see what you promised or what you wanted to do for a year. So you can just do your own tickler, and just hide it, or put it away and then revisit it.
For Yom Kippur, are there other prohibitions? I know in my past I have fasted and then watched television. That feels wrong. Are there other? Are you basically not supposed to do anything that's pleasurable? I imagine, or is that?
Well, unless you enjoy praying. And having conversations with people, but it's considered the Shabbat of Shabbats. So all the things that you don't do on Shabbat, you wouldn't do on Yom Kippur, and that includes using electricity, driving a car, and things like that. There are many synagogues where it's become acceptable that you drive to the service, but for example, you don't have the radio on and so on, and then you are in the synagogue and then you drive home if it's too far to walk to. And this is why Jews used to lead, and people say, well, why were there Jewish neighborhoods? What kind of things were going on there? What was going on there was that you could walk to the synagogue and you all went to the same butcher who gave you kosher meat, and the same bakery that made you kosher challah and things like that. So there was nothing mysterious about it. It was for convenience sake. Yeah, Jody.
So I have a question about Sukkot, is that okay?
Yes.
Within, the Jewish holidays, when you work for a Jewish organization, we follow a calendar for days off of not working that is kind of prescribed by the Orthodox. Is that correct, or Chabad? That's not how I always figure out which days we have off.
I would think the calendar that we follow gives somebody who would strictly observe the holidays in a way that they would have the opportunity to do that.
So why is it for Sukkot, and Pesach is kind of the same way, but Sukkot in particular, which growing up for me was always a very festive holiday.
Yeah.
Why do we get, not that I want to change this by any means, the 2 days off for the first 2 days of Sukkot, and then is it also the last 2 days, or is that
that's
Sukkot? Okay, so could you talk about that a little bit in this holy period?
Yeah, so the first 2 days, it's the beginning of the holiday, and then the last 2 days, it is part of Sukkot, but they have different names, and I don't want to confuse you and have anyone walk away from saying, it's impossible to be Jewish, there are too many names you have to remember. But the last 2 days are called Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah, but don't worry about that. It's just that they have those names. And they have their own special prayers and observances, but it's part of Sukkot, so.
The understanding that I have, particularly about Shmini Atzeret, which is that it was created in distinction as a holiday because Simchat Torah was on, which is, when they switch the reading of the Torah and whatever, and we march around and celebrate the Torah, is that the rabbis didn't want you to rush through the holiday to get to the next thing. And by having work prohibited on that day, it meant that it flanked Sukkot in a way that didn't allow you to rush through the entire holiday, so that you could be more thoughtful about its beginning, its middle, and its end. I don't know if that's legit,
Yeah.
but that's the way that I understood it. So there are many times when people, given my extensive work in the Jewish community, have said, what is that holiday? And there were many times when I was like, don't know. So now I'm sharing you with what I now know about it, so you can also answer that question, because people like to know that. That's also the reasoning for the first 2 days of Passover and the last 2 days of Passover, because historically people used to have seders. I don't even observant people I know don't necessarily have the last 2 seders, but it's because of the observance also of Yizkor, the memorial prayers during that time frame also that gives it the distinction as well. So there's 4 times when you say memorial prayers.
Yes.
And that's part of the holiday.
Cool,
So that's,
thank you. Not to get too esoteric, but about Shmini Atzeret, I recall hearing something about a rabbi, and I don't know who it was, but didn't recognize Shmini Atzeret or called it something else. Is there some sort of a conflict with that, the name of that?
There's not a conflict. Reform Jews tend to kind of ignore Shemini Atzeret and consider Simchat Torah the end of the holiday, so that there's really only one day holiday at the end. But for the larger community, people take 2 days.
Why do they tend to ignore that? Do you know why they tend to ignore that day, the Reform?
Reform feel like we should observe the calendar when the day occurs here, and if it occurs in Israel at a different time, then they should live and be well and observe it in Israel when they observe it. People who do 2 holidays are taking into consideration that they want to be in synchrony with Jews in other places, especially Israel, but even in other places. And because of the way the world turns and so on, if everyone does it for 2 days, it's likely that there's going to be a number of hours, up to 24, when everyone is doing it together. Anything else? Okay, great. Yes.
I actually heard once that it had to do with signal fires.
Yes.
Which I thought was really interesting, that it had to do, that's how they would signal that it was time for the holiday to begin, and it took so long to reach. So depending on how far you are from Israel,
Right, so that was the predecessor to my saying that everyone wants to be able to do it at somewhat the same time. So that's how dates used to be established, holy dates, by when the fires were set for each Rosh Chodesh, for each new moon, and then you would figure out when the holiday is. And this just allowed for some overlap. Okay, so let's read together these opening paragraphs, and we'll do the singing, and then we'll do the closing paragraphs, okay? And if you're not comfortable reading it, don't read. Open my eyes, O eternal, to change. Fill me with longing for possibilities. Let my life before be stepping blocks to what you want me to become. Open my eyes, O eternal, to change. Let me write beyond my narrow descriptions to begin a new narrative underlined with your name. Open my heart, O eternal, to put you ever before me. Help me to discard the insubstantial and replace it with your words. Open my life, O eternal, to fulfillment. Where before were shadows, let your truths live in my life, sustaining my actions. Turn me back to you, O eternal, back to long before I cannot remember, that beckon my soul. Turn me back, O eternal, opening to change. Hashivenu, Hashivenu, Adonai Elecha, Benashuva, Benashuva, Chadesh, Chadesh, Yameinu Kekedem. Help me, O God, to find still moments, quiet spaces within to refresh my soul. Calm my questions, my inner debates, and let me meditate on your goodness. Help me, O God, to nurture my courage, recalling moments of strength, remembering days of fortitude, the certainty of your regard. Help me, O God, to grasp changed visions, fill me curtains to blur my happiness, and wrap my tears with radiance, your hand upon my face. Help me, O God, to turn to light, alive, alive in your sight. So I want to thank everyone who helped bring this together. Rachel did the administrative work, and Diane made the delicious kugel, and Rachel and her family made the wonderful tzimmus, the carrot and sweet potato. Does anyone else want acknowledgement? Okay, thanks for taping it, and wish for everyone a Shana Tova, a year of goodness, and may it be in your grace.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. It's the first year.